Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tamara, and we are here today to talk another book. We are here today to talk about The Blood of Hercules. I just finished reading this last night. I've heard a lot about this in terms of through the whispers of social media. I feel like a lot of people were talking about good things about this book. And so I heard enough about it to pique my interest, picked it up, decided to give it a read. Where I rate this book, to be determined. I'm hoping after the time that we talk about this book together, I will come to a consensus. With that being said, I feel like it's kind of a little obvious that my undecisiveness is because there was some flaws in this book and there was some good. So I'm really undecided because of that balance. And so so we're going to talk about it, but right off the hop, I will admit this book, she's a beauty. She's a beauty. Look, we got some gold foiling. We got some patterns on the sides in terms of leaves. So she's a nice bookshelf book. For those of you into aesthetics, this may be the one for you. In terms of story, heads up, this is a spoiler talk, like the caption says. If you haven't read it, maybe you step aside, come back. We'll talk about it. But if you don't care, then please just stick around for the show. So this book I knew very little about. I came into it taking by the name. It said Blood of Hercules. I assumed there was some Greek mythology association. I assumed there was some fantasy, and that's kind of all I got. But also I assumed this was a one book stop. I thought that it starts with this book, it ends with this book. Didn't think there was intended sequels, intended series, intended growth. So I wish I knew that I was wrong in that thought, because at the very end of this book, you get a sneak peek to book 2, which is supposedly supposed to be coming out of fall of 2025. Now that's great, but I wish I knew that at the beginning, because I'm not gonna lie, thinking this was a one-stop shop, reading it, I had a lot of critique about it throughout the journey because I thought this was a one-stop shop. There are some things that they did not spend enough time explaining to me that I was like, oh, this kind of sucks to end this book not feeling like you got all of it. You know what I mean? So I had to sleep on it because I read this last night, but I had to sleep on it to try and decipher what's a fair rating for this, because now I know there's going to be more books. There's going to be more time to develop some of the things that were missing in this book. So I'm still undecided. There are some things I can't get past, but then there's others that I'm like, maybe I should be nicer about it. So hoping we talk about it, we'll figure it out together. High level summary of the world in this world is pretty much mortals and the gods, which we're just going to call them the Spartans, because they are referenced as Spartans in this book. But just for a high level summary, there's the mortals and then there's the Spartans. We follow a girl named Alexis in this, who came from a very rough upbringing, like unfortunately most do in some of the books we've been reading. But she gets selected to go to a Spartan academy for the course of a year, and by the end of this year she either lives or dies, because it's pretty gruesome. This school is pretty gruesome. And then she becomes a full-fledged Spartan, and with that being said, she gains immortality as well. But it's a little bit more intricate in the Spartan world. There are Olympian houses, and then there are chthonic, I think's the word for it. For the purpose of my poor pronunciation, we're just going to call it the good houses and the bad houses. So the good houses are the Olympian houses, which are essentially 8 of them. Those are some of the people we know, like Zeus and Poseidon, in the Greek lore, that. The bigger names we know. Obviously, the bad houses has someone like Hades in it. It's like House of Hades, something like that. But there is 4 bad houses called chthonic houses, and I'm reading the front 2 pages because they give you a legend at the beginning of the book, which is helpful. And then there is technically 8 Olympian houses. So that's kind of the deeper dive of the Spartan world. So technically, once you graduate, you could either fall within one or the other. But another thing about this world is because they really allude. Actually, we'll touch on this in a second. Continuing on, pretty much you follow the journey of Alexis until she makes it to the end of the year, and that's essentially the story. So the story is broken down in chapters where it gives you different timestamps throughout the year she's in this school. And that's the high level review for that. So in terms of what I liked, didn't like about this book, I was just about to mention it, but we're going to talk about it in more depth now, is the world building in this is a huge portion of this book. And I love me some world building. So I love that part of this book. And like I said, it's a pretty big part. I would argue even 60% of it is world building. You learn about this shift of power between mortals and Spartans before our character comes into play, as almost a before this world started kind of thing, and then the current struggle between the good houses and the bad houses within the world of Sparta. So it's very interesting. There's a whole shift of politics too. There's some new law being passed that makes people get married at a more early age, but also you can't marry your own kind as well. So it like keeps power equal amongst the houses. So it's very fascinating. It's very interesting. I really enjoy that. Each Spartan actually gets an animal that they bond to as well. And you also are born, if you have Spartan blood, you're born with the power of some kind. So you learn a little bit about those as well. It's really set up really well in this book. And then obviously ties to Sparta. So like we know Sparta is pretty ruthless. Like if anyone has ever seen 300 or have read anything about like, you know, some old text about Sparta, like I have, it's pretty ruthless. It's kind of like you take it and you run with it. Like there's no apologies. Like it's a pretty brutish school that essentially our character goes through the trials of. And a lot of kids at the beginning to the end died. Like there was a number of people who started the journey, and I think there's only 6 kids at the very end who graduated from the school and became immortals, including our main lead. So it was a very gruesome read throughout the journey of this, but it was really focused again on world building. A flaw in this is there's very, very minimal character building in this. Minimal. You get the gist and you get bits and pieces of all these characters that are influencing our lead or affiliated to her in some way, but they do not spend time for you to get to know anyone. And it drives me crazy because some people, when I was reading, I was like, oh, they sound like they could be really interesting. I'm curious where that story goes. You don't get it. You don't get the story that goes with it. And so that's kind of why I wish I knew there was a sequel to this, because I would have eased up on my frustration reading it, knowing that there's more time to learn about these people. Anyways, moving forward. Like I said, like it piqued my interest. Some of these characters did pique my interest, so that did attribute to me enjoying this book. I will admit that our main lead, like, she comes, when I say like she comes from a rough place, we've read books where it's very common where I feel like the female lead or the male lead, doesn't matter. They come from a place of nothing and then they become something, kind of like an underdog story. But I will admit that her beginning is pretty rough. Like she literally lived in a cardboard box. Like that's not an exaggeration. That's how her and her foster brother, Charlie, lived. And that's a good portion of the book. Like it's not just like 2 chapters. Like that's a good chunk of the book before she gets to that school where you get, again, the world building of her reality and where she comes from versus how she ends up at the end of the book. So you would think for someone coming from so little, and she comes from a very abusive foster care kind of system family, and it's very abusive, and she has scars everywhere. Like it was, you know, it's hard to read, but you root for someone like that to find their strength as the story progresses. And in Pigments, she did find her strength. Don't get me wrong. She did, but she's also, I think the wins you get from her developing her character, to me, were clouded because she's also such a naive, I don't want to say idiot, but she's kind of slow. Like she's slow. There's so much happening around her, so many obvious things. And this girl just doesn't get a clue. Like she doesn't clue in. And it's like her naivety in this pisses me off because I'm just like, how are you not seeing it? I'm seeing it, the world around you seeing it. It started to bug me. And she's smart. She's very good at math. Like she's one of those book smart people, but in the real world, because she just never had the confidence, everything flies over her head. Everything. And she has a best friend, which is a snake that no one can see. It's like a very rare breed of snake, which is super cool. And I feel like there's comic relief in this book because the snake keeps calling her pretty much an idiot. And they're like, how do you not know that this person's into you? How do you not know that this person's bad news? Like it just, the snake is trying to feed her reason to strengthen her up. And she's just like, you're being ridiculous. And I'm like, this girl is going to be the death of me. And that's kind of where some of my frustrations with the rating of this is going, because I'm like, now I know there's time for her to not be so naive, but at the same time, I'm just a little bit annoyed still by reading this entire book of her being naive. Like she literally clues in to the reality of the situation that we've known about at the very end, at the very, very end. And that leads us into the second book. So I'm hopeful for the second book. I am, that I'll like it almost more than this book, just because you hit a point where you develop your world, right? Like you've got the world building, but then you need sustenance. And I feel like I'm not getting it with the characters because, one, I know nothing really about any of them, like besides her, and she's already pissing me off because she's so naive. and that's kind of it. So like I need something else, and I feel like that's why I'm so undecided. But I am gonna read the second book, don't get me wrong. Another thing which I feel really stupid, is at the very end of this book, you do discover she never knew she was Hercules. Like that was her birth name, because when she got left behind as a foster kid, she was dropped out of some foster parents and said, raise this kid. Same with her brother Charlie, which came a couple years later from her. So at the beginning of this book, you get her childhood, and then you get her as a teenager at the school. But regardless, Alexis was essentially her foster name. So then she discovered at the end of this book that she's Hercules. Now, don't get me wrong. That made me almost like gag laugh a little bit. And I don't know why, because obviously this book says the blood of Hercules, and I feel really dumb because I feel like at the very back of this book, it quite literally says, I'm just a girl, and it turns out I'm Hercules. So I feel like I should have known that the main lead was going to end up being Hercules, but I feel like I kind of assumed her brother Charlie would be, because Charlie has a rough upbringing too, and Charlie's really innocent and quiet, so I just thought that would be a big revelation. But no, it's our lead that's Hercules, which is fine. It's fine. I kind of twitched when I read it, but I feel stupid because it was right in front of me, so whatever. But yeah, in general though, she has some really cool powers and stuff. You really get to learn about that at the very end, and she just, all she now is pain, like because she's grown up with scars and pain, and throughout the whole journey she's developed such a big pain tolerance. So at the very end, that's what I mean by no character development. She just like stays amongst this like trope of being like, oh, bring on the pain, that's all I've ever known. And so it doesn't change, like she doesn't change. So at the very end, that's essentially where we end up, is her embracing another challenge where she could very much die, but she doesn't care about dying because she doesn't care about her life. And that's where we are at the end of this book. No change throughout the story, but like again, you're hopeful that she finds reasons to love. Like her only friend is the snake and her foster brother, and that's it. She ends up indirectly being forced to marry out of the politics of this world two guys that we have been introduced to in the story. And like in Sparta, they can marry multiple people, so it's not weird for it to be two guys or whatever, two girls, doesn't matter. But yeah, so like it just, I'm interested in both of them. I think that they've dabbled enough in them to keep me interested, but you really know nothing about them as people. You just know what they are, what their strengths are, because they're well-known names to this book. And that's it. So after talking about this, I think I'm giving this book a 2.5 out of 3, because I don't think it deserves a 3, but I don't think it's as bad as a 2 either. That's, I think, my final thoughts on it. Yeah, so I guess we'll tie back in once we get the sequel in our hands, but let me know what you think of this book. I may be too harsh, I don't know, but that was just my honest opinion. Talk to you later, guys.